What's going on, everyone? In this video I want to go over this awesome Windows handheld that I built. So if you guys are familiar with this sort of a concept, there's the GPD Win and the Aya Neo. Essentially what they do is copy the Nintendo Switch in terms of portable handheld. You know, the controllers on the side, screen in the middle, and, you know, running games. It's a gaming console. But what I've done is gone a bit further and actually made my own. So the Aya Neo, the GPD Win 3, they cost upwards of $900, $1,100, $1,200. You know, they're pretty expensive. This cost me, and I kid you not, around $120, $130. And that's for the laptop, the display, and the controller. And you'll see in a little bit how exactly I built it. And you'll also see some gaming done on it. It's pretty capable, honestly, for that price, for, you know, again, a tenth of what the other products cost. I'm able to get pretty good performance. And I think if you set your expectations, you know, kind of low, but not terribly low, I think you'll be really surprised by this. So I haven't actually named this yet. I've been calling it the Nintendo Switch, sort of as a placeholder, but overall, I think I'm just, you know, really excited for this, and I'm excited to see how this goes in the future. So to start, let's go over the build. I'll walk step by step of how I put everything together and all the components that I used, all the components that I 3D printed. So the first step in building a project like this is choosing the donor laptop. So in this case, I went with the Acer Spin 1, and there are actually two models of this. The one that I have here is the Acer Spin 1 SP111-32N. And the main difference here with this model versus the other model is that this one does not have any sort of SATA port or hard drive expansion. So unfortunately, you are limited to the 64 gigs of eMMC storage that's soldered to the motherboard. Another reason why I chose this laptop, or rather one of the reasons why I chose this laptop, is that it was damaged. So you might not be able to pick it up here. You can see there's a big crack going along the touch panel. So unfortunately, the touchscreen doesn't work. However, the actual LCD did boot up fine. It did work fine. Some of the colors were a little washed out. Some of the backlighting was uneven. But again, you know, it did function as a laptop, but the main gimmick of this is that, you know, it converts into a tablet, but if the touchscreen doesn't work, you can't really use that functionality, or at least take advantage of it. So one of the other reasons why I chose this laptop is that we have a power button here that's not attached to the keyboard. So a lot of laptops will have the power button as just another button, part of the keyboard that is part of the ribbon cable for the keyboard. So if that was the case, I would have a hard time trying to power on the device without the keyboard connected, which again, we're turning it into a tablet, so we're not going to have that keyboard connected. So this was a plus. And if we take a look at the internals here, you'll see another few reasons why I chose this laptop. So the biggest reason that I chose this laptop was that the motherboard and battery and daughter board here are all very small, at least relative to a normal laptop. So this is a really good, nice feature. This allows us to make this tablet sort of as small as possible and as close to the Nintendo Switch form factor and size that we can get. Another good thing about this, even though the motherboard is small, the battery itself is also very thin. You know, you can see it's barely just a few centimeters, or I'm sorry, a few millimeters, honestly. It's very thin, very compact. And another nice feature about this battery is it's attached with a ribbon cable. So it's not one that has to be docked into a certain position on the motherboard. If that was the case, we'd have to create a custom wire, a custom adapter, which would be very complicated. Here we can just simply flip over the battery and it's still attached to that motherboard. So we have that nice functionality. And then here you can see we have the speakers, the daughter board, which again has that power and volume rocker, as well as a headphone jack and USB port. And then we also have this heatsink. So again, we have the CPU, RAM, all the components on the main motherboard here, being drawn out through this copper heatsink to this copper panel, which then connects to the body of the laptop and uses passive cooling to cool the motherboard and CPU. So this is good when you have something in this sort of a form factor where the body is aluminum. It's not the best cooling solution when you build something that's made out of plastic and you have the components so close together. So one of the troubles I had to overcome was basically creating a way that would allow the battery and the motherboard to remain cool while still remaining in such close proximity, again, overlying each other. Another reason why I chose this laptop, even though it's got sort of a low-end processor, it's a Pentium N4200, which is a quad-core processor. I believe the base is 1.1 gigahertz, turbos up to either 1.8 or 2.1 gigahertz. So even though, again, it has that low-end processor, it still leagues above any of those old Intel Atom Bay Trail processors. So, you know, again, using a cheap old Windows tablet is not going to give you nearly the performance that you would get out of this. And believe me, I tried. I bought an HP Stream 7. I tried to basically convert that into sort of a Nintendo Switch style handheld, and it just didn't work. It wouldn't run anything I threw at it. It would only run games from around 2004 and older. I couldn't handle any kind of emulation above N64, and even then that was kind of choppy. Yeah, so here we have again this sort of motherboard, daughterboard, battery conglomerate that we can then rearrange and put into the form factor of a tablet. So additionally, one other reason why I chose to use a laptop versus a single board computer, something like the Latte Panda, is that everything is already handled here. So again, we have the speakers already wired. They have their own little DAC, again, the audio driver. The charging is already handled. You know, we have a charging port up here. I didn't have to worry about that. The battery is all handled by the motherboard. It's all engineered to work with all the components you would need. And so all we're doing, again, is just rearranging it into a different form factor. And to manage the sort of size expectation, I went with the 7-inch touchscreen capacitive LCD. So this is, I believe, a Wave Share, I believe was the company. Yep, Wave Share. 7-inch capacitive touchscreen. So it uses HDMI input. So we have HDMI going from the motherboard to the HDMI input on the display. And it's also powered by a micro USB port that plugs directly into the motherboard. And that also gives you touch input as well. So it's a very nice kind of convenient form factor for this. And again, the motherboard, daughterboard, and battery, they're all relatively small compared to the screen, which gives us a nice compact feature. So let's go ahead and I'll walk through putting it together and sort of the steps I had to take to do that. So the first step here was to build what I'm going to call the base of the tablet. So we have on the back here, we have grill holes. So this is to allow for that heatsink to be placed right up against here and allow, again, some airflow to get into the tablet. Then we have these individual risers, and these each correspond to a screw hole on the motherboard and daughterboard. So these risers will rise the motherboard enough to allow that heatsink to bend around and be placed against the grill for the airflow. So it's raised up about maybe half an inch or so. So let's just go ahead and try to assemble this now. And I do apologize if it does seem to be a little odd. Typically I would put this together individually and then can make all the connections, but that's a little tedious to do. So again, here we have, let's just move this battery out of the way. So we have the motherboard and the heatsink. So we're going to just simply fold the heatsink over, making sure to leave enough gap that the heatsink isn't just touching the processor again, which would trap a lot of heat in. So we're going to make sure that has enough of a gap that the heat is being drawn through the heatsink and connected to this grill where the heat can dispense. So simply put, we'll mount this, sort of this configuration. bring that speaker over. So we want to make sure that that heat sink is lined up with that grill. And there's a bit of adhesive already on the heat sink, so it should just stick. And now we just have to line up the motherboard with the standoffs. Alright, so now we've got, again, that motherboard and daughter board screwed in. So we'll see here, again, as I mentioned, the motherboard is raised up a few centimeters. And you'll see the gold plate on the back is that heatsink that we were looking at before. So again, this is raised up enough to give just some nice airflow in, and then airflow out again in the back. And then we have the same thing for the daughter board just to keep it sort of symmetric. And the battery is still connected here. And we also have the speakers, which I didn't really have a specific spot in mind for them, so I've just kind of had them tucked underneath, sort of floating, if you will. And those can be taped down later in sort of a better spot, but I think for now they're fine, just sort of resting there. So then the next step is to place the battery. Now obviously we can't have the battery sitting on this gold part here. This is again, this is where the processor and RAM and all the parts of the motherboard are, and they get very hot. So if we had the battery there, that's a kind of a hazard. It's not safe for the battery, and it's just not safe in general. So what we can do is put these standoffs, or rather these platforms, for the battery. So by screwing these in, again using the same screws that came with the laptop, we'll have a nice spot for the battery. And these again raise the battery a few centimeters above the motherboard to allow for some heat dissipation before any heat is actually reaching the battery. So I'll go ahead and screw those in, and then I will continue taking a look at it. Alright, so now we have those standoffs fully screwed in. You'll notice I only have one screw on each end as opposed to two where there are two holes drilled. I realized I was actually running out of screws. The laptop had a little less than I was expecting. But this is fine. Again, you know, it's sturdy enough. It's not going to move. So then all we have to do is, again, apply some adhesive to the back of the battery. And then simply just line it up, push down. And there we go. Now the battery is attached. So now we technically have all the original laptop components that we would need installed on this tablet. And just to give a little look here, you can see that the battery is raised a lot higher than the daughter board and obviously the motherboard. So this is good. This gives enough sort of space, I think, to allow for proper airflow to keep, again, that hot CPU and motherboard components away from the battery. So initially when I made this, I figured I would just kind of screw in the screen on top like that and be done with it. Then I realized that it leaves all of the components exposed. So, you know, if something metal were to just fall in here, it would short circuit and possibly cause an issue with the motherboard. So I came up with, as an alternative, these components here to cover the side. So essentially what this will do is slot in, and this is a little tricky to do, just because, again, I had to glue everything together, so it's not precise down to the millimeter. But essentially it'll cover up the side here, still allowing access to the USB port, you know, the headphone, the buttons, while still at least covering a decent amount of the motherboard and just internals of this tablet that we're building. And then I have one here for this side as well, for the motherboard side. You'll notice that there's a cutout here. This is actually to allow the HDMI and USB cables to have access to rest and be able to connect because they stick out on the bottom of the display. So it needed just a little extra room just to be able to make that. So what I'll do now is go ahead and connect the screen to the tablet, plug it in, and then we can do some testing after that. Alright, so now we have the screen attached as well as those side panels. So you can see, it is a tablet. We have the vents on the back, the screen screwed into those pre-drilled holes, or rather, they're not pre-drilled. The 3D print I designed to print with those holes in mind. So again, just 4 each, using the screws that came with the screen itself. And then again, we have access to the HDMI port and the micro USB, as well as the HDMI port and USB 3.0 on the right, and the charger and micro SD card slot. So that micro SD card slot will come in handy when we want to install anything kind of big, because again, there's only 64 gigs of storage on this device right now. So yeah, you can see, it is handheld. It's a 7-inch screen, so compared to just, a normal phone, it's not terribly bulky. But, once you slot in a controller on the side and hold it, it won't be too bad. It is a little heavy only because the actual display itself is probably the heaviest component. The motherboard and battery are virtually weightless, as well as the actual 3D print itself. Those all weigh nothing. The screen is kind of heavy though, probably about a pound or so. So when we plug it in, again, we just pop in the HDMI, pop in that micro USB. Plug in each component to the tablet itself. And then just power it on. Show off the sort of capabilities of this tablet now that we've got it mounted in a telescopic controller. We'll do some emulation. So the first thing we can do is some Dolphin. I guess this would show off sort of where the power lies, sort of what the max power that we can expect out of this is. So we can launch, let's see, we'll do Super Smash Bros. Melee. Not the most demanding Dolphin game, or not the most demanding GameCube game, but I think it's a pretty good metric. So we can go ahead and make that full screen. And you can see in the corner, in the top right, there is an FPS counter. You can see we're hitting high 50s, usually 60 FPS. And let's see, looks like it might be having trouble focusing there. Alright. So you'll see, we're not really running into any hiccups, but again, we are not in a match yet. So let's just do a random match. And again, this controller is connected through Bluetooth. So you can see here, we're running at 60 FPS. Dolphin. This is running at the native resolution of the GameCube. Unfortunately, that's all you're going to be able to get out of this. But, it's a small 7-inch screen. The screen is, I think, 1280 or 1200 by 600. So it's not particularly high res. But, it is nice, again, as sort of a handheld. Alright, I'm really getting my butt kicked here. Yeah, I think this is a good indication, sort of, again, of the power that we could expect out of something like this. And you'll notice that my hands are resting on the table. This thing actually is kind of heavy. It's not super uncomfortable to hold. It's probably a few pounds. But, it is kind of thick. So I am resting my hands just to not get tired. I could imagine after an extended play period of holding it out, it might get kind of tiresome. But yeah, so Dolphin runs great. I haven't really had any issues with that. The next thing we can do then is jump into PC gaming. And for that, I'll load up Batman Arkham City. All right, so you can see here we've dismounted from the controller. That's just because I have a hard drive plugged in. It's a little easier to have that USB plugged in when the tablet isn't mounted on the controller. But right now we're running Batman Arkham City through Steam. So again, the nice thing about this running Windows is we have access to every PC application, including Steam. Alright, so we'll just pick a save file here. I always like to play as Batman Beyond. I think that's just a really cool costume. Alright, so, again, you can see we're running it. I mean, Batman Arkham City running on a handheld. Again, if I had an SD card, I could pop it on that, and then I'd be able to have the tablet actually mounted in the controller, making it really handheld. But for right now, I'm just running it from a hard drive. And it's running at about 30 FPS. For a handheld, I think that's fine. I don't think you need 60 FPS. It's running at the native resolution of the display, which I think, again, is 1200 or 1280 by 600, if I recall correctly. So a little under 720p. But again, for such a small screen, you're not going to really notice that all that much. It's not really going to be an issue. Yeah, so we have, again, console PC gaming rather. Again, games, that came out on console of console quality, running full speed on a handheld. And I think that's awesome that we were able to get this far. So this project really is working a lot better than I would have expected. Which again, really awesome for the fact that I built this for under $150. Okay, so final thoughts on this tablet. Again, I think it really just came out amazing. It was under $150, probably around $130 total, and we're able to play PC games and do some pretty decent emulation. Again, you're limited up to about Dolphin, the Dolphin emulator, so GameCube and Wii, but I think that's pretty good. For a handheld that, again, cost a fraction, about a tenth of the Aya Neo or even, the GPD Win 2 or GPD Win 3. I think we were really able to create something on the low end of pricing. It was about $20 for the controller, around $50 for the screen, and around $60 for the laptop that we transplanted into this tablet. So overall, I think this is a really doable project, and I'm really excited to start working on a second one with a more powerful processor, better display, and better battery life and better temperatures for cooling. This does overheat sometimes, and it does shut off, unfortunately, but it's kind of hit or miss whether it will. I've gone an hour playing it fine, and then I've gone 15 minutes and it'll shut off. So it is, again, kind of hit or miss. But I think overall, this is a really cool idea, and I'm excited to move forward with it. I don't think we need to pay an arm and a leg for a Windows handheld. I think we should be able to make them cheap, and we should be able to play the games we want to play, set expectations. Again, this is able to run Batman Arkham City, pretty good, 30 FPS. I think that's playable. I think that's fine for a handheld. And if you set your expectations, this might be able to meet them and even surpass them. So if anybody is interested in building this themselves, I can give a link to all of the different components I've 3D printed, all the models. But again, this is sort of just a test print. You can see it's still exposed at the top. We have the HDMI and the USB still kind of sticking out. It's not perfect. It's not close to being done, but I think for a test build, it is pretty cool. Yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you guys are interested in this, if you want to see me try to build another one. Just what are your thoughts on Windows as a handheld and PC gaming on the go? Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.